Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
President Trump goes prime time as moderate Republicans break from the speaker. Welcome to the Wednesday edition, with now enough signatures in the U.S. House to force a vote on extending Obamacare subsidies past this year, a story that's evolving now in real time as we count down to the president's address tonight from the White House. With analysis ahead from our political panel, we'll get an update from the North Lawn of the White House and Tyler Kendall, and we'll have insights this hour from Democratic Congressman Suhas Subramanyam of Virginia, and from former Republican Congressman Patrick McHenry, Bloomberg Politics contributor, all after we turn to Wall Street. Let's get an update on the Wednesday trade right now with Charlie Pellet. He's at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Mathieu. Prime time for Medline. Up and running right now, looking at a gain of 23.6% above the IPO price on Medline shares. They're up and trading right now. Medline out the gate at right now at $35.98. I'll keep you updated throughout the day on how the Medline IPO is faring. By the way, if you don't use their products, you certainly know their products. Medline manufactures and distributes medical supplies such as gloves, gowns, and exam tables used by hospitals and doctors. Stocks lower across the board. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Stocks are falling amid continuing skepticism about the AI trade. NVIDIA, Alphabet leading mega caps lower. S&P right now down 0.7%. Dow Industrials down 79, drop there of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index right now down 1.1%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 Index down 1.1%. 10-year 4.15%, with a 2-year 3.49%. Gold up $42 the ounce, up 1%, 43.45 on the precious metal. Silver surging now by 4.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1.6%, 56.16 right now for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin, meanwhile, at 86,521. Bitcoin down by 1.4%. Updating you on Warner Brothers Discovery, the parent of HBO and CNN, it is advising its shareholders to reject that hostile takeover bid by Paramount Skydance in favor of its original agreement with streaming giant Netflix. Warner Brothers Discovery down 2%, Netflix up 1.3%, Paramount Skydance up 2.6%. And again, we'll keep you updated on any and all developments involving Warner Brothers Discovery. One more time on Medline, now trading at $36.26, S&P down 0.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, Joe Mathieu.
Okay, Charlie. Bumpy market today. Thank you so much. Charlie Pellet will have more on Wall Street just about 20 minutes time here on Balance of Power. We've got our eyes on Micron Technology as well as the AI trade shrivels. Micron reporting results after the bell. It's down right now about 3%, and we'll have more on Micron's results in the late edition of Balance of Power when we do Power Moves with Romaine Bostick. All this counting down to the big primetime show tonight live from the White House. President Trump right around this time yesterday announcing his plans to address the nation, and he will do so roughly 8 hours from now. We'll bring you that address live here on Bloomberg TV and radio with big questions about what he will be discussing. With affordability, the key buzzword in town recently, the same reason why Donald Trump went to Pennsylvania 1 week ago and why J.D. Vance went just yesterday. The president's been seizing on this term with his eyes on Democrats as well. As we recall, listen.
They gave you high prices. They gave you the highest inflation in history, and we're bringing those prices down rapidly. They say, oh, he doesn't realize prices are high. Prices are coming down very substantially. But they have a new word. You know, they always have a hoax. The new word is affordability. I have no higher priority than making America affordable again. You can give up certain products. You can give up pencils. You don't need $37 for your daughter. 2 or 3 is nice.
All right, I'm giving up my pencils. Is that what he will say tonight from the White House? Will it be a message about affordability, health care, possibly, with what we've seen already today on Capitol Hill? We're going to get there in a moment. Republicans signing on a discharge petition to force a vote to extend Obamacare subsidies. Maybe it will be an announcement about the Venezuelan blockade he posted about last evening. It's quite a menu of options as we turn to Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall at the White House right now, joining us live from the North Lawn. Tyler, are we hearing anything from the president about this speech tonight?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, you really gave a good outline there that this could span a range of topics. We have been going off of an interview and preview that the White House press secretary gave yesterday, where she said President Trump is expected to tout his policies from the last year, but that he could also preview new policies, as it appears that the White House has been trying to dictate and change that narrative as we head into the midterms, particularly around affordability. Because as you're talking about, this has been that issue that the White House has, I think it's fair to say, been on defense over in the past few weeks after Republicans lost a slew of elections just last month. And since then, we've seen President Trump go out on the campaign trail, Vice President Vance go out on the campaign trail, and the administration push forward some new policy ideas, such as refloating the idea there could be tariff revenue rebate checks. So it's going to be something that we are going to watch very closely here, how the president navigates this, considering we know in his speech in Pennsylvania last week, he did veer off topic and hit on some other key issues that we know are important to his base, such as immigration policy as one example. But you hit on it at the top of the show. We are going to be watching really closely, at least I am personally, what he says when it has to do with health care, because while this president has given us some indications on the type of support, the type of plan that he would support, we know that he wants to see less subsidies going to insurance companies. He hasn't really weighed in when it comes to the plans that are circulating on Capitol Hill. And Joe, as you know, as of now, it looks like Congress is set to adjourn and leave town without extending those expiring premium tax subsidies under the ACA.
It would be a big deal if you gave some direction to the Republican conference this evening. Tyler, I have to ask you about this post on Truth Social, because indeed we're looking for details about Venezuela as well. We're now using the word blockade, or at least the president is, and we want to be careful here because semantics mean a lot. The president on social media, Venezuela, he writes, is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger. And the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before. Tyler, is this about regime change? What's about to happen?
Well, Joe, you'll recall last week, Bloomberg News had this incredible reporting, people familiar telling us that we are about to enter into a new phase when it comes to the U.S.'s strategy against Venezuela, designed to get Nicolas Maduro to relinquish control. And that news phase started when the U.S. seized a foreign oil tanker for the first time last week since 2014. And now this latest move, you did mention semantics. It is important for us to make the distinction. According to Bloomberg Economics, this actually isn't a full blockade. This is what's known as a quarantine, because it is narrowed into only sanctioned oil tankers. This does not extend to all vessels coming in and out of the waters around Venezuela. But this really does mark the latest escalation in the U.S.'s pressure campaign, trying to now threaten to deny those important oil revenues for the country, which is already facing financial strain. So we're going to watch really closely how this ultimately does evolve, because it's not totally clear right now how this quarantine is going to be implemented, when exactly it does start. But we're already starting to see potential buyers steered away. Right, yesterday on the program, we spoke about how these 4 super tankers headed for Venezuela ultimately turned around and reversed course because the administration had been telegraphing that this move was going to happen. Joe, I'll point you to one other thing from our analysts at Bloomberg Economics, who we love to cite all the time. They say that when there is a pressure campaign, if that intended goal is not reached, there's normally only one direction of travel, and normally that direction of travel is up the escalation ladder.
Well, pretty remarkable moment we're in, Tyler. Thank you so much. Tyler Kendall at the White House. The speech is set for 9 p.m. Eastern time, as we mentioned. We'll carry it live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Unclear what the venue will be, whether the president will be behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office or somewhere else in the White House in the Cross Hall, as he's been preferred to use more recently. He hasn't had a very heavy string of primetime addresses. Then again, this is a different White House. This is a president who addresses the nation just about every day, if not multiple times a day. What's happening now on Capitol Hill is important. If you're just joining us, we've seen a remarkable turn in the debate over extending Obamacare subsidies, realizing there will be a vote later today on a Republican plan that does not address Obamacare subsidies. That may or may not pass, and likely will with the Republican conference, or will it be that easy? Because we saw a jailbreak earlier today with 4 Republicans who crossed the aisle in frontline districts in states including, well, it's just New York and Pennsylvania. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, there's the lineup. Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican, Pennsylvania. Robert Bresnahan, Republican, Pennsylvania. Ryan McKenzie, Republican, Pennsylvania. And Mike Lawler, the Republican from New York, all sitting in districts that lean blue and wanted at least a vote on an Obamacare extension. When it became clear the speaker was not interested, they moved to a discharge petition that will force the vote. Those four brought that number to 218, and they are now in business. Right at this time yesterday, I was talking about this matter with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith of Missouri, and asked him about the outcry from constituents that many lawmakers talk about. It doesn't seem that he's hearing from that many in his office. Listen.
The person who would be calling me from Missouri would be someone on employer-sponsored health care. And everything the Democrats is talking about has nothing to do with lowering the cost of premiums for people who are on employee-sponsored health care. And that's 164 million Americans. All that they're talking about is the 24 million people on exchanges. We need to lower the cost of health care for every single American, not just the people on ACA.
Mr. Smith, of course, is not in a frontline district and sees things differently than the four I just mentioned. We had the voice of a Democrat now in Congressman Suhas Subramanyam, the Democrat from Virginia's 10th district, with us live from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thank you for being part of our conversation today. This discharge petition will hit the floor. We will also go over the cliff. What happens then?
Well, we'll see. I believe we'll be able to vote on this at some point. I don't know if it'll be before the end of the year. But I know that there are Republicans, more than 4 Republicans, who have supported the ACA tax credit extensions and understand that without them, healthcare costs will go up for millions of Americans, including many in their district. And so, yes, we do have a cost issue when it comes to healthcare. Healthcare costs way too much right now. We need to do a lot to fix that. But the solution to the cost issue isn't what Republicans are putting forward, which is to take away care to a lot of people, access to care, quality of care. That's their solution, and that's not a real solution because people will die under that solution. We have a solution where we can continue to figure out a long-term solution, but in the meantime, also fund these tax credits that have been so essential to so many Americans getting health care access.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because a solution is going to have to follow a gap of some sort, right? It's clear that we will go over the cliff. This discharge petition would bring a vote to the floor. I'm guessing, Congressman, correct me if I'm wrong, likely mid-January. Then something's got to happen with the Senate. And I know that there's a bill over there that's not too far apart from what the moderates have been looking at in the House with a smaller extension and some eligibility requirements. When could there be a law? How long will voters need to wait?
Well, remember, for there to be a law, the president needs to sign it, right? And so, yes, the Senate needs 60 votes to pass it. This president has not shown a willingness. Not only that, he shut down the government so that we wouldn't have a conversation about these tax credits. We had that conversation anyway, but he still refused to reopen the government and have this conversation about health care. So I am a little pessimistic about these tax credits passing, but I'm still going to push forward. I know my colleagues are not going to stop. Colleagues now on both sides of the aisle are not going to stop until we make sure that health care is affordable for millions of Americans.
Well, this is where I ask you what you're hearing, behind the scenes. What's happening in the cloakroom when you talk to other Republicans? Because clearly, you already said it. It's more than 4 here. What would this vote look like if it actually hit the floor? How many Republicans do these 4 members speak for?
Well, I know far more than 4 wants to vote for them. I would say dozens want to vote for them. But the reality is when Donald Trump calls them, they switch their votes based on what Donald Trump says. Now we have 4 Republicans who have changed their tune. And so maybe that could embolden more to follow. But this speaker and this Republican Congress has followed whatever Donald Trump has said to do. And the Epstein files, even by the end, he said to vote for it. And so that's what they did. But we're at a place now where Republicans are starting to break away from Donald Trump because they know that he's toxic to our country and to even their party.
Well, I know he's also got a lot of loyal members up there, Congressman, so it was a pretty remarkable moment when so many Republicans put their name on a discharge petition to release the Epstein files. We haven't talked about this for a minute because that got the clock ticking. I think it was 30 days. Friday's the day that the files are supposed to be released. And yes, the president did sign that discharge petition now law. Congressman, you're on the Oversight Committee. Should Americans prepare for this release, or is there going to be some reason at the 11th hour why they are not made public?
My crystal ball is foggy. I will say this, that if they do release something, I believe it'll not be a full release, that it'll be a partisan release. They'll try to find Democratic names in it. But if the president hasn't released the files by now, I don't think he will release the full files like he promised he did during his campaign last year, or that he's required by law to do now. I'm a little skeptical at this point. If they wanted to release the files, they could have released it well before this coming Friday, if they really wanted to be transparent with the American people.
It is coming at the last hour. Is there anything that the Oversight Committee can do to further compel the Attorney General to make this public?
Well, now, the Oversight Committee, we have had a subpoena out for these files for 4 months now, and they gave us one production that was 97% public documents. The other 3% weren't that helpful. And then that was it. And then there was radio silence from them. Now we're at a point where this is law. And so someone can go to court, and the courts can compel the administration to release the files. And we'll see if the administration wants to ignore court orders. We've had that conversation this year before.
Well, we're about, 48, 72 hours away from that being the case. Congressman, you must have seen this Susie Wiles interview. I can only imagine the conversations among members of the Oversight Committee. The White House Chief of Staff telling Vanity Fair that the president was just wrong when he invoked Bill Clinton as being complicit in the sex trafficking scandal surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. She said there was absolutely no evidence pointing to that. Will we hear from the Justice Department that it's an ongoing investigation all the while, and therefore these files cannot be released?
Again, the Justice Department works for the president at this point. He controls it, and he's going to try to control what's released and how it's released. Another thing that she said in that interview was Trump is in the files, and that he and Epstein were friends, and they were, I think, playboys together, single playboys together. And so it's pretty clear that there was a close relationship there, and that must be part of the reason why he hasn't released the files. That's at least what I see from my vantage point. But I'm glad she did that interview, because it was pretty incredible how, she said all the quiet parts out loud about this president.
Well, interesting moment. He's going to be speaking to the nation this evening, Congressman, and I'm wondering your thoughts about another potential government shutdown. You're in Virginia, teeming with federal workers who just endured the longest federal shutdown in American history. Is there anything the president can say this evening to get the healthcare debate back on track and keep the government from shutting down when we run out of money at the end of January?
Yeah, the president can say, I want to work across the aisle to come up with a healthcare solution that's long-term. And in the meantime, we can pass these tax subsidies to be able to help Americans afford healthcare. I think that alone will solve 90% of the problems we're having right now on Capitol Hill related to healthcare. I think the other thing he should do is try to figure out how to work together with us next year, because otherwise 2026 is going to be a long year. I do not want a shutdown. I did not like this past shutdown, but we have to continue to fight for the American people.
Well, 25 was a pretty long year, Congressman, so I guess we'll find out together. Thank you for being back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Live from Capitol Hill, Congressman Suhas Subramanyam, the Democrat from Virginia, with us here on Balance of Power. We'll hear from a Republican later on this hour, one with experience, Patrick McHenry, former Republican congressman, former Speaker Pro Tem, now Bloomberg Politics contributor, will give us the lay of the land here. He predicted all of this was going to happen as we walked up on the shutdown. We'll have much more ahead with our political panel as well. A blockade, as the president calls it, in the waters off Venezuela. We'll get to it next on Balance of Power, with a lot happening today in Washington, all leading up to the primetime address from President Trump this evening. Should I say tonight? Yeah, 9 p.m. Eastern time. We'll carry it live here on Bloomberg TV and radio with context and analysis. Having received a warning last evening about maybe something that the president will touch on beyond affordability or the many domestic issues he could bring up, it's Venezuela and what he calls a blockade. On Truth Social, Venezuela, he writes, is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America, followed by the threat. It will only get bigger, he says, and the shock to them will be nothing like they have ever seen before. Now, it's important to read further down on this very long post When it goes to all caps, he says, today I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. He does refer to the Maduro regime, the illegal aliens and criminals he says the regime has sent into the U.S. during the week in the Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. Of course, we've also been blowing up alleged drug boats at a rapid pace, adding 3 more just yesterday. And our political panel is watching all this unfold with war powers votes set to be held this week on Capitol Hill as soon as today. According to Congresswoman Catherine Clark, the Democratic whip told us that last evening on Balance of Power. Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis is with us, Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside Democratic strategist Arshi Siddiqui, founder, CEO, Bellwether Government Affairs, former senior aide to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It's great to have you both with us here. Arshi, is this march to war, apparently in the Caribbean, going to be checked by lawmakers on Capitol Hill?
I think there are more questions than answers on this issue, so I think we will see more and more, and we've already seen it, I think, on a bipartisan basis. And the interesting piece of this is that Democrats actually could, they certainly don't support the Maduro regime, so we just haven't seen the president make a case. Mm-hmm.
Rick, you're no stranger to naval operations. The president using the term blockade, apparently quarantine would be the technical term here, as a blockade is seen as an act of war. Is this what's wrong with announcing stuff like this on social media?
Well, I think, the lack of precision has been a hallmark of the Trump presidency in the first term and obviously in the second term. So Donald Trump uses words as weapons. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he were sitting around a room of lawyers and saying, well, you can't say blockade because it's an act of war, he's going to say to them, screw you. I mean, I'm going to use it anyway because, this is what we're doing. And it'll have a bigger impact on the American public if they hear me say that and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, you can't take the Trump out of Trump. I mean, he's going to put it in all caps and talk about it in the best way we can. And, he always mentions sanctioned ships. So that's sort of his out on the technicality. But he is promoting a conflict with Venezuela. And today, he's now talking about this as a way to get back stolen assets. When the Maduro and the Chavez regime nationalized oil fields and producing facilities from U.S. companies, now he's talking about wanting that back. So this thing is escalating, and maybe we're escalating to de-escalate. But right now, I would bet escalation is the number one issue.
Well, to Rick's point, he writes again in this long post, for the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization, and therefore the blockade. That would be the grounds for regime change, right?
Absolutely, but we haven't seen a more robust case that's been made. And I think that at the very least, with the resources that are being expended here, and also you look at the time he's spending on these outside international issues versus I think Democrats there are a lot of questions on how does this fit into America first when you have we still haven't seen him weigh in on healthcare, right? Yeah, right. These subsidies are lapsing. So I think there are questions on all sides of this. And I think hopefully the president will make that case to the American people and Congress.
Will that be part of the speech tonight, Rick? When we were in this time yesterday before the jailbreak and the discharge petition on health care and everything else took place in the House, this was the big story, and it was followed by the post last evening. Are we going to have the strikes begin in 3 minutes kind of speech, or will he take the time to try to lay the foundation for what could be a looming operation?
That's a really good question, Joe, because obviously this is all with the backdrop of the release of the Epstein files on Friday. So he wants to get ahead of it, create some news. Nothing would create news more than some kind of an operation onto the landmass of Venezuela. And obviously they're not going to forecast that punch out of the press office a couple of days in advance. But I very well could imagine a scenario where he talks about helicopters are now, entering Caracas airspace. I mean, it is what George Bush did with the taking out of the leader of Panama during his term. And so there's some precedent for this. And I would say backed up by his own constituency. I mean, there's a lot of polling data that shows this is a way to get right with MAGA. I mean, even though the concept of foreign entanglements is sounds like it's outside the American First dictates, the reality is America First kind of likes the attacks on these drug boats and keeping America safe from the kind of pernicious drugs that they're shipping into it.
Yeah, really interesting, Rick. Let's say that does happen, Arshi, if some sort of military operation were announced. Would that excite the MAGA base, and what would be the reaction from the Democratic Party?
So I don't see myself as a MAGA expert.
No, I get that too.
But certainly I think there is, to the point on drugs, Venezuela, there is a contingency, and also you look at South Florida. There's a very big echo chamber on this, right?
Marco Rubio has tried to make
Absolutely.
that case to this president.
And I think Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has been very pivotal in this strategy. So I think for Democrats, it's again the questions and it's the checks and balances, because I think even when you look at blowing up on these drug smugglers, like nobody knows who are on these boats. The Congress still has not seen the second tape as was promised by the president. So again, it goes back to all of these questions and checks and balances, and having that, even if it is top security clearance, but just the tried and true nature of these briefings are not happening.
You bring up a great point. That video, they said, would be shown to senators and members of Congress at the end of this week or second half of the week. That could be tomorrow, Rick, and it would be interesting timing if that did coincide with the address. How about dumb question time, Rick Davis? I don't know what's happening on the ground in Venezuela. Obviously, the president has, in fact, confirmed that there was some sort of CIA covert op that was underway on the ground. Why not offer Maduro $100 million to leave? He could go live with his friend Vladimir Putin, probably somewhere really nice. Wouldn't that be a lot cheaper than what we're doing right now?
I don't know if it's an economic issue. Honestly, my own view is it's a moral issue. He's a really bad guy. He's done horrible things to his own population, and he's been one of the most outspoken anti-Americans in the hemisphere, if not the world. I'd have a problem with paying a guy to go away. We have other ways of doing it, and frankly, what we want to do is create a lesson here for other malcontents in the region who might say, I could get paid if I just give the U.S. a hard time. I know there have been conversations with the Maduro folks to get him out of there, and he's rejected some of these forays, including going to Turkey, which is, at least you don't risk falling out of a fourth-floor hospital when you're in Moscow.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
True.
And so there may be an exit plan for him, but I think the door is going to close on that pretty soon if he doesn't look out, just like it did on Noriega.
Wouldn't he be smart to take an invitation like that if we've got the biggest armada in South American history at his doorstep?
I mean, based on what we know about Maduro, also getting run out of his own country by Donald Trump might be, it's not a great look. So I think that's also probably in the mix.
You just wonder what we're spending on a daily to keep this armada afloat here. I'm guessing it would be a lot more money than what I just suggested. Big picture this evening. The president's going to be interrupting the season finale of Survivor. This is not the White House of when we were younger, okay? The people watch the president clipped up on Twitter. Does the primetime address on three-letter networks actually have an impact anymore?
I believe it does.
Yeah.
I believe that, Donald Trump knows how to create a spectacle. He knows how to create drama. And everybody's talking about what is he going to actually really talk about tonight. I think the challenge on the Republican side is there seems to be this assessment that this is a messaging problem across the board in terms of the agenda versus a substance problem, a policy agenda problem. And I think on the Democratic side, first and foremost, I think there's a case that's being made and will continue being made that this is more about the policies, and these policies, whether it's tariffs, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the high price of food in the grocery store, all of these policies are making things worse, not better.
Rick, you have to have a good reason to interrupt people in their living room at 9 o'clock at night. Will the president have one?
Look, I think that Arshi's right. This is still an important thing when the president speaks to the American public. How many times did we have shows where we said, what Biden's got to do is go talk about why there's so much inflation and how he's going to cure it, and he never did. So I think it's good that the president is taking the time before the end of the year to make the case for the administration that he's had and actually give us some sense of what's going to happen next year, because it's been a roller coaster. And I don't think we would have thought that this year was going to turn out the way it has. And any insight that he can give the American public on what next year is going to look like would be very reassuring.
We're going to find out together, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Join us here on Bloomberg TV and radio for The Real Thing. Big thanks to our great panel, Rick Davis and Arshi Siddiqui. We appreciate the insights. Our conversation straight ahead with Patrick McHenry, only here on Bloomberg. Of course, we're going to be tracking Medline all the while. Biggest IPO of the year in a year that has seen hundreds of IPOs. Pretty remarkable, up 29% now. Look at that, topping $37 on a not great day for the market. So clearly a big appetite here. In fact, we were reporting at Bloomberg that it was oversubscribed by some 10 times. Before we get back to politics, the Republican jailbreak, and the future of health care in America, and our conversation with former Congressman Patrick McHenry, former Speaker Pro Tem, we want to bring in Bailey Lipschultz for more. He's been watching Medline since it went public here. Medical, not so much device maker, but medical supply maker. Think gloves, gowns, and masks. Bailey is Bloomberg Equities reporter live in New York. Says a lot to be this popular on a tough day on the markets like this, doesn't it?
It does. And it also says a lot when you're an IPO that, with the green shoe being potentially exercised, you get close to $7 billion. So the biggest U.S. IPO since Rivian, as you mentioned, up close to 30%. I would say for all intents and purposes, this has been a far better success in day one than I think even the sponsors who backed this company would have expected.
Pretty remarkable, considering the fact that I don't think there's any tie into AI here, Bailey, unless I'm wrong. This is a company that makes old-fashioned stuff, and I guess maybe it's appropriate or on brand for this market right now for investors to be chasing an actual profitable company with a track record.
No, certainly. And we've seen that play out really in the last few months. If you look at the leaders in the S&P 500, we've seen investors rotating to healthcare companies and more defensive plays. And when we caught up with Medline CEO this morning, he painted a vision that they should be compared to Costco. And at first you say, I don't know how a healthcare company is going to be related to Costco, but their vision is they have a private brand. Kirkland obviously has their, Costco has their Kirkland brand. Medline is really touting their ability to own their supply chain and do a number of their logistics in-house. So when you think about it, it's not your typical supply chain company because they produce so many goods. They have over 300,000 products that they distribute, and they are a key player within the healthcare space. So if you look at kind of the fundamentals, talking to investors, this is what people want to see more of, as opposed to excitement around what AI could bring 5 years from now.
Well, I guess that's kind of refreshing. 300,000 products? That's incredible. Just give us the 30,000-foot view, Bailey, because it has been a pretty big year for new issues. And remembering when Donald Trump took office, we heard all about animal spirits. This is go time for the Goldman Sachs of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've seen about $45 billion raised in IPOs here in the U.S., so that lags, call it $50 billion, what we would see in a typical year, the decade before COVID. But you have to keep in mind, nobody, for all intents and purposes, wanted to go public in April and May because of the tariff turmoil. And it was very difficult to get public when the SEC was shut down. So if you say $45 billion raised and we remove 3 or 4 months, that's actually quite good. And a lot of investors and bankers obviously are very keen for what 2026 can bring. And there's a lot of excitement, whether that's private equity portfolios or the SpaceXs of the world.
Yeah, great. Bailey, thank you. Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg Equities reporter, live from New York, as we track Medline on a pretty big debut here on Wall Street today, even as markets sag. If you were joining us after we heard from Charlie Pellet, the S&P 500 is down about 1% right now. The NASDAQ down a little bit more than that. So pretty remarkable to see an IPO up 30%. And we'll be tracking it throughout the day for you here. The big news as we came to air around noontime was 4 moderate Republicans crossing the aisle to sign on to a discharge petition. Couldn't this have been a lot easier? Then again, I think back to our conversations with Patrick McHenry. Before the government shutdown, before we entered autumn even, remember the way he described what would happen starting in October and, of course, bleeding straight into the new year? It's happening. Bloomberg Politics contributor, former Republican Congressman, former Speaker Pro Tem, Patrick McHenry with us in studio. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
Does it get worse?
Oh, yeah, it gets worse before it gets better. John McCain had a line that it's the darkest before it goes full full black. It feels like that. There was an easier way out of this than what has happened in the House. The Senate process is working actively to resolve health care. But let's just step back on health care.
Okay.
Here we are in America today where almost all the health care laws, and in fact, every major health care law in America was written by Democrats. The American people do not like the health care system we have. The laws are written by Democrats. And then the third fact is the American people prefer the Democrats on health care. So it's a complicated thing.
Yeah.
It's a complicated thing, and it's an opportunity for Republicans to actually have a message and a policy set on health care. And Republicans, my friends, and me included, have failed to do it. And it's not that they lack a plan. It's just that they have an infinite array of plans, none of which is sufficient to actually answer the question of the cost of health care, the access to health care, the things the American people care about, nor is there a sufficient plan that would get all Republicans to support. And so here we are today where the Democratic alternative is more favorable in the American people's eyes than the Republican alternative on health care. And now you have moderate Republicans saying, actually, I'm going to side with my constituents over the powers that be in Washington, and that's why we have this breakpoint today.
Right. So a discharge petition rules the day once again. What will happen to these frontliners, the Mike Lawlers, the Fitzpatricks? They've crossed the speaker. Is there a penalty for that, or are they speaking for a much larger group in the Congress?
Well, traditionally there's a penalty for that, but in a narrow House, it's a very difficult thing to police, number one. Number two, the White House doesn't seem to be stepping in here. And so I think the White House would like to see a resolution rather than allow 10 million American people to see their health care costs go up dramatically. They would prefer that to not happen. And so they're letting this happen on Capitol Hill and asking the leaders to resolve it. And it's not being resolved by the leaders. I think you see a process in the Senate blessed by Thune and the Republican leadership. But in the House, you've had these moderates break because of the failure of the leadership decisions in the House. And I think we're just going to see this story continue into January when the vote actually happens in the House.
Boy, so if you're Mike Johnson, I mean, I guess you just explained why he is bringing this bill that he's bringing to the floor today. It's a lot of components that were rejected by the Senate that have been floated before that don't address Obamacare, but also do not include the health savings accounts that Bill Cassidy made fashionable in the Senate. So this is just an effort to put something on the floor?
It is. It's an effort to put something on the floor. And to be quite frank, this issue, this challenge for Republicans on health care predates Speaker Johnson.
Sure, of course it does.
He's just trying to resolve something in a very tough situation. And an administration that would rather not touch it would rather let the legislative branch go work their will on it. But this bill that's on the floor is a pale comparison to what traditional Republicans would like to see on a fulsome health care package. But it's the best they could do in a short period of time.
Yep. President's going to speak tonight. I'm sure you'll have the chair in front of the tube at 9 o'clock. Does he get into this? Is that what this is about? Or is it sort of broad affordability theme? Or does he say, after what happened today, I'm calling on Republican members of Congress to extend the Obamacare sub? We won't call it that, but something like that.
We shall see.
Yeah.
I think they want to make a break onto something more optimistic than rear-facing. And I think this will be the opportunity for the White House to pivot into a set of issues that are more favorable for Republicans going into
So this is like a State of the Union preview kind of then.
Look, President Trump is always there to capture attention and redirect it. So I don't think it's going to be a straight line going. I don't think there's a straight line going into tonight or coming out of it. And we're going to see what the twists and turns are.
Wow. All right. Well, this is going to be fun. And I guess that's why everybody's carrying it. Remember when networks used to argue with presidents like Biden and Obama about going on in prime time?
It used to matter.
Those days
and
are
now
over.
This president knows how to captivate attention.
Well, they'll probably have better ratings
day.
with the speech anyway, right? I don't know what they're in. It's prime time.
It's all about the ratings, right? Isn't it?
That's what they tell me. I don't know. That's why we're on right now with Patrick McHenry. Is January going to be worse than December? Was worse than November? We're going to go over the cliff, as they say. You'll have this discharge petition. You'll also have a government funding deadline.
Yeah, so Leader Schumer has tried this both ways, where he rolled over in March on a government funding deal, and he got slayed by his party. Then he went and fought valiantly and it created the longest government shutdown in American history, and the resulting effect was he got slayed by his party. So he's tried it both ways, and both ways he's lost political cover and political leverage.
Wow.
So there's no third way here.
Okay.
So I think January 30th is more likely to be a normative thing where we fund part of the government and have a continued resolution for the rest. But between now and then, I think you're going to see a resolution to this health care debate.
Sure.
It has become a health care debate that's this massive,
right,
when in reality it only deals with 10 million of over 300 million Americans, an important slice, but just a slice, and not a full resolution to health care. I think we have health care, we go into government funding, and then what comes thereafter is digital assets, cryptocurrency, the market regulation bill that's working its way through the Senate.
Understood.
So I think you have a bill signing for the president on government funding, on health care, and on crypto in the first quarter of next year, which is wildly different than what we've seen over the last 3 months here in Washington.
We'll play that back, James. You got to grab that. I have to ask you, you might not know the answer, but as we consider Donald Trump's thinking through how to handle Congress right now, when he emerged from the Oval Office this morning on his way to Dover, he was there for the dignified transfer in Delaware, the 2 Iowa National Guardsmen who were killed in Syria. Kevin McCarthy was with him. They were in the Oval together. They walked over to the Marine One and they took off together. Is he getting advice from the former speaker?
I think so, and I think well, broadly speaking, the president keeps counsel in a very different way than previous presidents. He talks to a lot of people, makes decisions for himself. Speaker McCarthy has shown, and he's a dear friend of mine, but he's shown himself to be a very adept political mind. Knows how to handle the party as it is today, not as it was a decade ago, but Trump's Republican Party, and he knows the president's equities. He knows politics, and he knows the president's equities, and knows the party. And so I think those things give him a favorable voice and an active input to the president in a direct way, as well as a high regard by his team writ large.
That's fascinating, though, to think that that's the conversation being had on the chopper today, and it may inform what he says tonight.
Well, it could, but also, I mean, Speaker McCarthy is well sought after as a political advisor.
Understood.
And so I think the president is using his, his player the best way he can.
Sure.
But Speaker McCarthy's maintained great relationships with this Trump team and the broader administration. He knows his way around Washington really well. And I think he's enjoying being in the private sector as well, rather than the glare of the House floor lights.
You must have read this Vanity Fair interview with Susie Wiles, right?
Hard not to.
I'd love for you to say no. I dare you to say no.
Yes.
Is she going to ask Kevin
McCarthy? By the way, far more readable than the Crystal Olivia Nunzi thing.
Whoa.
That's far more readable.
Well, that's been making the rounds, too. We have less than a minute.
What I would tell you is
Are they going to ask Kevin McCarthy to be chief of staff?
Don't know. But what I do know is this.
Okay.
I'm going to dismiss that one quickly. But what I would tell you is this: the response, the response from of rallying around Susie Wiles is amazing. Is not your standard response from a Trump administration or any other administration. Shows her strength and capacity.
Yeah.
Also, this flight with Speaker McCarthy shows that he's really tied in. Anything could happen.
All right, that's closer to an answer. So you're saying there's a chance. Patrick McHenry with us. How about that? We'll play this tape back as well, and I'll meet you on the late edition of Balance of Power with much more to talk about ahead of the big speech, 5 p.m. Eastern, here on Bloomberg.